I still wake up at 5:47 a.m., even though there's no reason to. No alarm, no schedule, just the old habit of a man who spent 41 years showing up before anyone else and leaving after the lights were turned off. My body remembers what my life used to be, even if my life has forgotten me. The house is quiet at that hour, not peaceful. Quiet in the way an empty theater is quiet after the audience has gone home. The refrigerator hums. The floorboard near the hallway clicks once when the temperature shifts. Margaret used to complain about that board. I never fixed it. Now it feels like the house clearing its throat. I make coffee the same way every morning. 2 scoops of ground Colombian beans, nothing fancy, just the brand I bought for years. Filter. Water to the line. I stand there while it brews, staring at the microwave clock because the coffee maker's display died sometime in 2019. I never saw the point of replacing it. Time works fine without being displayed. Margaret's mug is still on the second shelf. White ceramic. Thin crack near the handle. World's best mom, even though she never liked cliches. She used it anyway. I don't. I sit at the kitchen table and read yesterday's mail. I always read mail a day late. It feels less aggressive that way. Electric bill, $184.23. Higher than last year. Everything is higher than last year, except my pension. Grocery store coupon booklet. A church flyer addressed to current resident. And a letter from my son, Daniel, postmarked 3 days ago. Daniel doesn't send letters. He sends emails, short ones, usually starting with "Hope you're doing well." When your own son hopes you're doing well instead of knowing it, something has already gone wrong. I don't open the envelope right away. I butter a piece of toast instead. Too much butter. I scrape some off with a knife and put it back on the plate like it can be reused. Old habits don't just die hard. They linger embarrassed. The letter is 1 page. Printed. No handwriting. That alone tightens something in my chest. "Dad," it begins. Not "Dear Dad." Just "Dad," like a subject line. He writes about work first. A merger. A promotion. Something about expanding into Arizona. I skim. Numbers blur when they don't belong to you. Then comes the paragraph that matters. "We finalized the sale last Friday. Everything went smoothly. I've taken care of the details, so you don't have to worry." Sale. I read that word 3 times. My eyes move back up the page, then down again, like the meaning might change if I approach it differently. Sale off. What exactly? My hand starts to shake, which annoys me more than scares me. I've always hated losing control over small things. Big things at least announce themselves. I keep reading. The house went for $1.2 million. Given the circumstances, I've transferred $15,000 to your account to cover immediate expenses. We'll talk soon. No exclamation points. No apology. No explanation. Just a clean professional summary. Like a receipt. I fold the letter neatly and place it next to my plate. Then I look around the kitchen. The oak cabinets I installed myself in 1994, sanding the edges by hand because Margaret liked them rounded. The refrigerator we bought on sale after the old one died 2 weeks before Christmas. The calendar on the wall, still turned to March, with Margaret's handwriting circling our anniversary, even though she didn't live to see the last one. This house. The house I paid off in 2008, 5 years early, because I hated debt more than I liked vacations. The house Daniel grew up in. The house where his mother died in the upstairs bedroom on a quiet Tuesday morning in October, with the window open and the heat too high. Sold. I don't call Daniel right away. That's important. I finish my coffee. I wash the mug. I dry it with the same dish towel I've used all week. Then I sit down at my desk in the living room, open the bottom drawer, and pull out the folder labeled property. The deed is there, or at least a copy of what I thought was the deed. My eyes catch on a signature at the bottom of 1 page. Mine, dated June 12, 2019. I remember that day. Daniel had come over with a bottle of wine I didn't like and a smile that stayed just a little too fixed. He talked about estate planning, about efficiency, about protecting assets just in case. He said it was temporary. He said it was smart. He said, "Dad, trust me." I did. I trusted him the way you trust someone you carried on your shoulders once. The way you trust someone whose childhood doctor bills you paid before your own. I reach for the phone. My hand stops halfway. Not yet. Outside, a moving truck passes slowly down the street, white and anonymous. Someone else's life being packed into boxes. I sit very still, listening to it fade. Something has been taken from me. I just don't know yet how much, or how badly Daniel has miscalculated. But I will. And that, I realize, is the first calm thought I've had all morning. The first thing I did was check my bank account. Not because I expected clarity, because I needed to confirm that this wasn't a misunderstanding I could still walk away from with my dignity intact. Hope is a quiet, humiliating thing. It convinces you to refresh a page you already know won't change. The transfer was there. $15,000. Sender, D. Whitmore Consulting, LLC. Date, March 14th, 2025. Memo support. Support. I stared at that word for a long time. Long enough for the screen to dim and the cursor to blink like it was waiting for me to say something back. $15,000 would cover maybe 6 months of rent in this city if I was careful. Less if I wasn't. Daniel knew that. He had sent me spreadsheets once, explaining why downsizing would be good for me. He liked spreadsheets. They made life feel orderly, justified. I closed the laptop and leaned back in my chair. The leather creaked in the exact way it always had. Margaret used to joke that the chair sounded like it was sighing under the weight of my thoughts. She would have hated this moment, not dramatically, not with tears. She would have hated it quietly, with that tight jaw she got when someone crossed a line and thought politeness would protect them. The house smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old paper. I cleaned every Thursday even after Margaret died, especially after. Dirt, at least, is honest. You can see when it accumulates. I spent the rest of the morning opening drawers. Not in a panic way, methodically, the way you do when you finally accepted that something has been wrong for a long time, and now you're ready to see how wrong. The filing cabinet in the hallway still had its crooked label maker tabs. Taxes, insurance, medical, miscellaneous. Under miscellaneous, I found the folder Daniel had brought over 6 years ago. Cream-colored, too thick, smelled faintly of toner and his cologne. Something expensive, sharp, and patient. Power of attorney. Limited, he'd said. Temporary. Trust adjustments. Streamlining. I remembered the way he'd paced my living room while explaining it all, careful not to sit down, as if the furniture might trap him into staying longer than he wanted. Dad, this is just paperwork, he'd said. You're not giving anything up. It just lets me help if something happens. Something happens. Margaret had been gone less than a year at that point. I was still learning how to sleep alone in a bed meant for two. Still finding her hair in the shower drain. Still opening my mouth to tell her things and remembering, halfway through the sentence, that there was no one on the other end. I signed because I was tired. I signed because he was my son. I signed because I didn't want another conversation where I had to defend my competence like a witness on trial. I sat on the floor with my back against the cabinet and read every page this time, slowly, without assuming the best. There it was, a clause I'd skimmed back then, trusting the heading more than the content. Authority to act in matters of property disposition under specific conditions. Conditions vague enough to drive a truck through. Or sell a house. My house. I stood up too fast and had to grip the edge of the desk until the dizziness passed. Age does that. Waits until moments like these to remind you that your body is no longer a neutral observer. The phone rang. I let it ring 3 times before answering. Dad, Daniel said. He sounded relaxed. Relieved, even. I was going to call you later. Later, I repeated. Yes, I figured you'd need some time to process. Process, like grief, was an invoice. You sold the house, I said. A pause. Not a surprised one. A calculated one. Yes, he said finally. It was the right move. For whom? For everyone, he replied smoothly. You can't manage a property like that anymore. The maintenance alone. I paid off the mortgage 17 years ago. I know. I replaced the roof 5 years ago. I know. I still shovel my own driveway. That's exactly my point, Dad. He shouldn't have to. I laughed then. I didn't plan to. It came out dry, short, unfamiliar. You didn't ask me, I said. I didn't need to, Daniel replied. Legally. There it was. The word he'd been waiting to use. The one that ended the conversation before it ever became one. You gave me $15,000, I said. That's to help you transition. Out of my own house. Dad. I raised you in that house. Silence. Not guilt. Just impatience. Look, he said, voice tightening. You're being emotional. The market was perfect. We got an incredible price. Most people your age would be grateful to walk away with cash instead of responsibility. Most people your age. I'll call you back, I said, and hung up before he could respond. My hands were steady this time. That surprised me. I walked through the house, room by room, touching nothing, just looking. The dent in the hallway wall from when Daniel was 12 and threw a basketball inside. The window latch Margaret never trusted. The spot on the living room carpet where the sun hit just right in the afternoon. This wasn't nostalgia. This was inventory. By the time I sat back down at my desk, the shock had burned off, leaving something colder behind, something clearer. Daniel thought this was over. That was his mistake. I opened my laptop again, not to look at my bank balance, but to search for a number I hadn't dialed in years. The attorney Margaret and I had used when we set up our wills. The one Daniel didn't know about. The phone rang once, then twice, then someone answered. And for the first time since that letter arrived, I felt the ground stop shifting under my feet. If you believe older voices still matter, support this channel with a like and a subscription. The attorney's name was Harold Levin, and his voice hadn't changed. Still gravelly, still patient in the way men become when they've heard every version of panic and betrayal a client can offer. He remembered me without hesitation, which irritated me more than it comforted me. Daniel sold the property? He asked calmly, after I finished explaining. Yes. And he transferred $15,000 to you? Yes. A pause. Paper shifting. Keys tapping. Did you receive any formal notice prior to the sale? No. Did you sign a consent form specific to this transaction? No. Another pause. Longer this time. Mr. Whitmore, Harold said carefully. I need you to bring every document you have. Originals, if possible. Copies, if not. Today, that word, today, was the first solid thing anyone had given me since the letter. I put on my coat for the first time in 3 days. The sleeves felt heavier than I remembered, like they were resisting being used for anything purposeful. Outside, the sky was the dull gray of late March, undecided about rain. The car started on the second try. Margaret used to say it liked to be asked twice. Harold's office was exactly where it had been 15 years ago, above a bakery that smelled aggressively of cinnamon. The elevator still shuddered between floors like it resented upward movement. He didn't offer me coffee. That told me more than his expression did. We spread the documents across the conference table. Deeds, trust amendments, power of attorney, a settlement summary Daniel had never sent me, but which Harold pulled from a public database in less than 30 seconds. Sale closed March 8th, he said, tapping the page with a pen. Funds distributed March 10th. How much did he keep? I asked. Harold hesitated. After taxes, fees, and disbursements? He looked up. Approximately $1,043,000. I nodded. Numbers don't shock me the way intentions do. He paid off his business line of credit the same day, Harold added. $812,000. I exhaled through my nose. So that's what Arizona was. What happens now? I asked. Harold leaned back. Now we determine whether he exceeded his authority. And if he did, then we unwind the sale. The word felt unreal, like suggesting you could unbreak a bone. The buyers moved in yesterday, I said. That's unfortunate, Harold replied evenly. For them. 2 days later, my phone rang at 2:14 p.m. Daniel didn't say, hello. What did you do? He demanded. I hired a lawyer, I said. You can't just. I can, I interrupted. And I did. His breathing was sharp now, controlled but barely. You're jeopardizing everything, he said. The buyers, my company. Do you have any idea what this looks like? Yes, I said. It looks like you sold something that wasn't yours to give away. That house was a liability, he snapped. You're too old to be sentimental about real estate. I'm old enough to know when I'm being robbed. Silence, then laughter. You think a judge is going to side with you? He asked. You signed the documents. I signed to let you help, I said, not to let you harvest. His voice dropped. You wouldn't survive on your own anyway. There it was. Not concern, not justification, just contempt, finally unwrapped. You gave me $15,000, I said. Why that number? Another pause. Then irritated honesty. It was reasonable. No, I said quietly. It was symbolic. He hung up. The injunction was filed the next morning. By noon, the funds from the sale were frozen. All of them, including the portion Daniel had already moved. Harold was efficient in the way only men without emotional investment can be. The hearing was scheduled for April 2nd. Daniel didn't call again before then. His wife did. Please, she said, voice shaking. You're destroying our family. I pictured her standing in the kitchen of a house I'd paid for once, barefoot on heated floors. You did that yourselves, I replied and ended the call. The courthouse smelled like dust and old paper. Daniel sat 3 rows ahead of me, shoulders rigid, suit impeccable. He didn't turn around. He didn't need to. He already knew I was there. The judge was younger than my son. That felt appropriate. Harold spoke first. Calm, precise, dates, amounts, clauses. He didn't mention Margaret. He didn't need to. Daniel's attorney argued necessity, best interest, capacity. And the judge looked at me. Mr. Whitmore, she said. Did you intend to sell your home? No, I said. Did you authorize your son to sell it on your behalf? No. Did you understand that the documents you signed allowed for this outcome? I met Daniel's eyes for the first time. No, I said, and neither did he. The room went very quiet. The ruling didn't come that day. Judges like to sit with things, let people sweat. Daniel left without speaking to me. His jaw was clenched, his steps too fast. I stayed seated until the room emptied. Outside, it finally started to rain. Not hard, just enough to notice. I stood there on the courthouse steps, coat dampening slowly, and understood something with perfect clarity. The house was gone, but the illusion that I owed my son my silence was gone too, and that I realized was worth far more than $15,000. Waiting is a skill you either learn early or never master at all. I had learned it in hospital corridors, sitting beside Margaret while machines clicked and hummed like indifferent insects. I had learned it in union offices, waiting for decisions that would affect men who trusted me to speak for them. I had learned it in kitchens, waiting for a kettle to boil when there was nothing left to do, but stand still. So I waited. The injunction held. The sale remained suspended. The buyers, young, anxious, polite in their emails, were temporarily renting a furnished apartment across town while lawyers spoke to lawyers and money sat motionless in accounts that suddenly felt radioactive. I moved through my days quietly. I cooked for one. Scrambled eggs, always slightly overdone. Soup from cans I'd bought in bulk years ago because it made sense at the time. I stopped buying fresh bread because it went stale before I could finish it. Margaret would have hated that compromise. She believed bread was meant to be eaten without calculation. Each morning, I walked through the neighborhood, past houses I recognized and people I no longer did. The Jenkins place on the corner had solar panels now. The old Ramirez house was gone entirely, replaced by something white and angular that looked like it had been designed by someone who didn't plan to grow old inside it. People waved. I waved back. No one asked where I was living now. That was something I appreciated more than I could say. At night, I sat at the desk and went through paperwork Harold requested. Bank statements, tax filings, insurance policies, decades of financial life reduced to numbers and margins. It was all there, plain as day, once you looked without affection. Daniel's pattern emerged slowly, like a bruise. Small transfers at first, temporary, just moving funds. He'd always paid them back, until he didn't. Business expenses labeled as reimbursements. Consulting fees paid to himself. Accounts consolidated under the justification of efficiency. He had never stolen in a way that required boldness. He had stolen in a way that required patience and my reluctance to question him. The realization didn't hurt the way I expected it to. It didn't feel sharp. It felt dull, heavy, like discovering a room in your house has been hollowed out over years, one careful cut at a time. Harold called every few days. Updates were brief, technical, encouraging without being optimistic. They're nervous, he said once. That's good. Daniel did not contact me. Instead, mutual acquaintances did. Old coworkers. A cousin I hadn't heard from in years. Conversations that began with concern and ended with awkward silence once they realized I wasn't interested in explaining myself. One afternoon, I received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "Dad, please stop. We can talk about this." No signature. I folded it once and placed it in the drawer with Margaret's jewelry. It belonged there, with things that had once meant something and now existed mostly as proof that they had. The hearing resumed in early April. This time, the courtroom was fuller. Daniel's company had sent someone. The buyers were there too, sitting together, hands clasped like they were waiting to be called into a doctor's office. The judge listened, asked questions, took notes. Harold spoke again, sharper now. He laid out the misrepresentation plainly, the absence of informed consent, the conflict of interest Daniel had never disclosed. Daniel's attorney tried to reframe it as misunderstanding, family miscommunication, generational differences. The judge's expression did not change. When she ruled, she did so without drama. The sale was voided. Funds were ordered, returned in full. Penalties assessed. Daniel's authority under the power of attorney was revoked effective immediately. Further review of his financial conduct was recommended. The room didn't react the way you expect rooms to react to justice. No gasps, no applause, just the soft sound of people exhaling, all at once. Daniel turned around then. For a moment he looked like a boy again, confused, cornered, desperate to be understood. Then his face hardened. "This didn't have to happen," he said to me as we stood outside the courtroom. "It already did," I replied. "You ruined me," he said. I looked at him carefully. "No," I said. "You tried to build something on my back and forgot I could still stand." He walked away without another word. The house was still legally mine, but it no longer felt like something I needed to reclaim. Instead, I sold it myself. Not in a rush. Not to punish anyone. I chose a family who wanted it for the reasons Margaret and I once had. I negotiated calmly, fairly. It sold for $1.18 million. I bought a smaller place near the river. 1 bedroom. Big windows. No stairs. The furniture fit without feeling crowded. On my first night there, I sat on the floor with my back against the wall and listened to the water outside. It sounded like movement without urgency. Daniel never asked for forgiveness. I never offer it. Some things don't end with reconciliation. They end with clarity. And for the first time since Margaret died, I slept without the feeling that something was being quietly taken from me in the dark. People assume that when something like this ends, it ends loudly. They imagine slammed doors, final speeches, declarations of independence delivered with shaking hands and raised voices. That's not how it happened. It ended quietly, in increments. The first letter arrived in late May. Certified mail. Daniel's name and the return address, written in the precise block lettering he'd always used, even as a child. Inside was a demand, formal, aggressive, dressed up in legal language borrowed from someone else's mouth. He claimed emotional distress, loss of income, damage to reputation. He wanted compensation. I read it once, then again, and then I laughed out loud. Not bitterly, not hysterically, just a short, genuine laugh that surprised me with its ease. I handed it to Harold the next morning. "He's flailing," Harold said, adjusting his glasses. "That's not strategy. That's panic. Will it go anywhere?" "No," he said, "but it will cost him money to find out." That was the beginning of the second unraveling. Over the next few weeks, more information surfaced, not because I hunted for it, but because once a structure collapses, people stop pretending they don't see the cracks. A former partner contacted Harold. Quietly, nervously. He had questions about a loan Daniel had guaranteed with assets he didn't own. Another call came from a bank I'd never done business with, asking me to confirm that I was not, in fact, a silent investor in my son's company. Each call ended the same way. "I'm not involved," I said. "I never was." By June, Daniel's firm was under review. By July, its credit was frozen. By August, his name appeared in places it hadn't before: court filings, financial notices, small business forums where people spoke anonymously and without mercy. We did not speak during this time. Not once. I heard about him through others. His wife had moved out. The house they bought partially with the money from my home was listed, then delisted, then listed again at a lower price. His car disappeared from the driveway of the office building, where his company's name was being scraped off the glass. One afternoon, while I was unpacking books in my new apartment, my phone rang. Daniel. I let it ring until voicemail picked up. He didn't leave a message. 2 days later, he tried again. This time I answered. Dad, he said, and his voice was different. Smaller, rougher around the edges. I need to talk to you. I'm listening, I replied. A pause. I didn't think it would go this far, he said. I know, I said. You could help me, he continued. You still have the money. You're comfortable. You don't need all of it. I looked around my apartment. The unpacked boxes. The thrift store bookshelf. The view of the river slipping past without drama or apology. What would helping you look like? I asked. Another pause. You could testify that you understood the documents, he said. That you agreed. It would change things. For you, I said. Yes, he admitted. For me. There was no shame in his voice. Just calculation, stripped of its polish. No, I said. You're choosing money over your son, he snapped. No, I said again. I'm choosing truth over convenience. You're punishing me. I'm letting consequences finish the job you started. He hung up without saying goodbye. After that, the call stopped. In September, I received notice that Daniel had settled several claims out of court. In October, his firm officially dissolved. In November, I saw his name in the paper once, buried deep, small font, associated with a regulatory fine that would follow him for years. I felt no joy reading it, only relief. The final paperwork arrived just before Christmas. The last of the funds, every dollar from the house sale plus interest, was officially released to me. Harold suggested investments, diversification, long-term planning. I thanked him and told him I'd think about it. Instead, I paid off my own modest mortgage in one transfer, $243,117.42. I made a donation to the hospital where Margaret had spent her final weeks, $50,000. I set aside money for my granddaughter's education, quietly, anonymously, without Daniel's name anywhere near it. The rest I left alone. Money, I've learned, behaves better when it isn't treated like a weapon. On Christmas morning, I walked down to the river. It was cold, but not unbearable. The water moved steadily, indifferent to holidays and family drama alike. I thought about Daniel not with anger, but with a kind of sad clarity. I had given him everything I thought a father should give a son. What I hadn't given him was a boundary. That was my mistake, but it was also the last one I intended to make. As I turned back toward my apartment, the sun broke briefly through the clouds, lighting the surface of the water just long enough to notice. And I understood, finally, that justice doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it comes quietly, takes its seat, and waits for you to stop pretending it isn't there. The river kept its schedule long after everything else fell apart. That became important to me. Every morning, I walked the same path along its edge, past the bench with the peeling green paint, past the man who fed ducks with bread he shouldn't have been giving them, past the place where the water bent just enough to catch the light like it was thinking about something. I walked slowly, not carefully, slowly by choice. Speed had never done me any favors. Life settled into a smaller shape. I learned the sounds of the new apartment, the click in the radiator at night, the upstairs neighbor's television murmuring through the ceiling, the elevator cable sighing as it descended. I bought a lamp with a warm bulb because overhead lighting felt accusatory. I cooked meals that made sense for one person and stopped pretending leftovers were a failure of planning. Some evenings I set the table anyway. One plate, one fork, a glass of water. Even if I didn't plan to drink it, Margaret would have approved of that small courtesy. The paperwork eventually stopped arriving. Harold called less often. When he did, it was no longer about strategy or risk. It was about closure. Accounts reconciled. Files archived. Loose ends tied off with professional neatness. Anything else you need? He asked during our final call. I thought about it. No, I said. I think I'm done needing things. He laughed softly. That's a good place to be. Daniel did not reappear in my life. Not through letters. Not through mutual acquaintances. Not even through the careful distance of secondhand information. It was as if he had stepped sideways out of my world and kept walking until the sound of him disappeared. I wondered once or twice whether I should reach out, whether age or blood or the sheer weight of shared history demanded a final attempt. Each time, I imagined the conversation, the explanations, the justifications, the carefully worded regrets that stopped just short of responsibility. And each time, I decided against it. There is a difference between forgiveness and permission. I had learned that too late with Margaret and too early with Daniel. In early spring, I returned to the old neighborhood, not to see the house. I had no interest in that, but to visit the cemetery. Margaret's grave was neat, the stone still pale, her name carved deeper than I expected. I brushed away leaves with my hand and stood there longer than I needed to. I did all right, I told her quietly. Eventually, the wind moved through the trees, indifferent to approval or disappointment. That was fine. Margaret had never been one for dramatic gestures. On the way back, I stopped at a hardware store out of habit, walked the aisles slowly, smelled the wood, ran my fingers along shelves of screws I no longer needed. I bought a small screwdriver set anyway. It felt right to own tools, even if they stayed in a drawer. That summer, I sold the last thing Daniel had ever asked me to co-sign, a storage unit full of items he'd abandoned years earlier. Old furniture, boxes of papers, a treadmill still wrapped in plastic. The auction brought in $3,420. I donated it to the public library. It seemed appropriate. People assume that closure feels like relief. It doesn't. It feels like space. Space where anger used to sit. Space where excuses once echoed. Space where I no longer had to explain my worth in terms of what I could provide. On my 70th birthday, I bought myself a cake from the bakery downstairs. Chocolate, too rich. I ate a single slice and wrapped the rest for the neighbors. They thanked me politely, without curiosity. That night, I sat by the window and watched the river move past, steady and unconcerned. I thought about the house I had lost and the life I had outgrown, about the son I raised and the man he became when he thought no one was watching. Money had never been the point. It was simply the language Daniel chose to express what he thought I was worth. He was wrong, not because I won in court, not because the money came back, but because I finally stopped measuring myself by what I could be taken from. The river kept moving. So did I, and that at last was enough. There is a moment, usually unannounced, when a life stops asking questions. It doesn't happen all at once. It arrives quietly the way evening does. First a shift in light, then a softening of edges, then the understanding that nothing more is expected of you today. For me, that moment came on an ordinary Tuesday in late autumn. I was standing in line at the pharmacy, holding a small plastic basket with blood pressure medication and toothpaste, when the clerk asked, "Do you have someone picking you up?" "No," I said. She smiled, satisfied, and rang me up without further concern. I walked home along the river, the air sharp enough to feel earned. Leaves skittered across the path, dry and impatient. I watched them for a while, how they resisted settling, how they were carried until they weren't. At the apartment, I put the kettle on and sat down at the small table by the window. The river was higher that day, swollen with recent rain, but it stayed within its banks. I appreciated that kind of discipline. On the table lay a thin envelope I hadn't opened yet. No return address. No stamp I recognized. I knew who it was from before I touched it. Inside was a single page, handwritten this time. Daniel's handwriting. Less precise now, the lines uneven, as if written by someone unfamiliar with his own hand. He didn't apologize. Not directly. He wrote about losing things. Work. Friends. Momentum. He wrote about misunderstanding his own strength and mistaking proximity for ownership. He wrote about silence and how loud it had become. He asked, finally, if I would consider meeting him. Just once. Coffee. Neutral ground. I folded the letter carefully and set it back inside the envelope. I did not feel anger reading it, nor satisfaction, only a distant recognition, like seeing a familiar landscape from a train that isn't stopping. I thought about what that meeting would be, the way he would sit across from me, older now, trying to position himself somewhere between son and stranger, the way I would listen, polite, controlled, withholding nothing but permission. I thought about how long it had taken me to learn that some conversations exist only to reopen doors you worked hard to close. I wrote back that evening, briefly, clearly. I hope you find your footing. I won't be meeting. Take care. No signature flourish. No added warmth. No cruelty. Just truth, delivered without ornament. When I dropped the letter into the mailbox the next morning, I felt nothing dramatic. No trembling. No regret. Just completion. Winter came early that year. The river slowed, thickened, took on a darker shade. I bought heavier curtains and learned which grocery store stocked the oranges that still tasted like something. I joined no clubs, made no resolutions. I lived. Occasionally, I told pieces of a story to people who earned it. Never all at once. Never with names. Always with restraint. Most listened quietly. A few nodded too hard, as if they recognized something of themselves in the outline. I never framed it as triumph, only as correction. On my 71st birthday, I walked to the bench by the river with a thermos of coffee and sat there until my fingers grew numb. I watched the water move past, carrying reflections that never stayed long enough to be claimed. I thought about Margaret, and how she used to say that a good life wasn't one without loss, but one where loss didn't get the final word. I had given my son a house. I had given him trust. I had given him the benefit of my silence for too long. What I kept in the end was simpler. My name, my boundaries, my ability to sit with myself without flinching. As I stood to leave, the bench cold against the back of my legs, I understood something with a clarity that surprised me. The house was never the inheritance. Neither was the money. It was a lesson I learned too late to pass on, and just in time to keep. And for the first time in years, I walked home without feeling like I was being followed by the life I used to owe someone else.